Today we are making this absolutely delicious cookie dough cake. First, we combine our dry ingredients, which includes all-purpose flour, granulated sugar, baking powder, and salt. Once that's all mixed together, we add in our softened or room temperature butter. You want to be able to stick your finger into it, and it should be soft but have a little resistance still. I like to cut this up into smaller chunks with a spatula. You could also use a knife. Then we're going to mix that on a low speed and just pulse it in gradually so that none of the butter chunks fly out of your bowl. Then we add in one more stick of butter, and we want to mix that on a medium speed until all the butter is combined. The mixture should look kind of like moist sand at this point. And then we add in our egg whites next. I like to use a cup of pasteurized egg whites that come in a carton, but you can also use 7 fresh egg whites, or you could also use 4 whole large eggs. The mixture should become really thick at this point, and I like to pause and just scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl. Sometimes the dry ingredients can get kind of trapped down there, and you want to make sure everything is getting properly incorporated. Then we add in our sour cream, some vegetable oil, and our vanilla extract, and we're going to mix that on a medium speed until everything is combined and smooth. We do one more scrape here just for good measure and give it another mix for about 30 seconds just to make sure everything is nice and fluffy and light. This recipe uses the reverse crumbing method, so you don't really have to worry about overmixing it. Then we fold in our mini chocolate chips and divide the batter evenly between our prepared pans. I'm baking this in 3 8-inch cake pans, and I'm spreading it out with an offset spatula just to make sure the batter is nice and even. We're going to bake these at 350 degrees for about 34 to 38 minutes. They take a little bit more time because of the chocolate chips. And while those layers bake and cool, next we work on our cookie dough cake filling. The first step is to cream together our butter and an entire bag of light brown sugar. You want to mix this on a medium-high speed for a minute or two until it becomes lighter in color like this. I like to scrape the sides, and then it's time to add in some heavy cream, our vanilla extract, and a little bit of salt just to help balance out the sweetness. And since this cookie dough is going to be eaten raw, we want to make sure that we pasteurize or we heat treat our flour. You can do this in the microwave or in the oven, and you want to heat it until it reaches 161 degrees Fahrenheit. Once it's reached that point, it's safe to use and you can consume it raw. We're adding that flour into our butter sugar mixture, and then we're also adding in our mix-ins. I chose to use mini chocolate chips, mini white chocolate chips, and some rainbow sprinkles, but you can really use anything you want. Just make sure that you don't add in more than 2 cups of mix-ins because that can make the dough kind of fall apart and it has a hard time sticking together. Once our mix-ins are evenly distributed throughout our batter, we're adding it into some plastic wrap lined cake pans. I really love how perfect of a filling the cookie dough discs make inside of a cake, but you could also add crumbled up bits of cookie dough between the cake layers. We're using our remaining dough to roll into a variety of sized balls, and we're going to pop those into the fridge to firm up. And then we work on the last component of this cake, which is our brown sugar buttercream. We are again creaming together our butter and our light brown sugar until it becomes lighter in color. And then we're actually going to let it sit for about 5 minutes. We want to give the brown sugar a little bit of time to dissolve so that your buttercream is nice and smooth and not grainy. I like to do a finger test and just rub it between my fingers at that stage to make sure it's nice and smooth. And as long as it is, then you can move on and add in your powdered sugar and your heavy cream. If you find that it's still grainy, you can continue to mix it and let it sit for another 5 or 10 minutes until it's smooth. So at this point in time, our buttercream is a great consistency, and we're going to give it a nice stir with a rubber spatula to make it extra smooth before we add it onto our cake. I always love to add a dab of buttercream to my cake board just to help our first cake layer stick in place. Then we're spreading some of that brown sugar buttercream on top of the cake layer before adding our edible cookie dough disc. I like to pipe a little bit of extra buttercream around the cookie dough disc and some on top just to help the cake layer stick together. We repeat that process with our next cake layer and make sure everything is properly lined up. Then we're adding in our second edible cookie dough cake disc, it's a mouthful, and adding our top cake layer upside down just to make the cake easier to frost. I like to press down on the top cake layer a bit just to make sure that there's no air trapped in between the filling and the layers. Then we cover the cake in a thin crumb coat of frosting just to make sure all that filling and all those cake crumbs are trapped in before we add on our second layer of frosting. Once the cake has been chilled in the fridge or freezer and the frosting is firm to the touch, we add on our second, slightly thicker layer of frosting. I like to smooth it using a bench scraper and clean up the edges with a small offset spatula. Then we're going to place the cake inside of a large rimmed baking sheet like this, and we're going to gently press sprinkles and mini chocolate chips around the side of the cake. Once I feel like the cake is sufficiently covered, I like to pat the sprinkles and mini chocolate chips with my hands just to make sure that they're nice and firm in the frosting. Then we're going to chill the cake one more time. I promise it's the last time. While the frosting firms up, we make our chocolate ganache, which is just heavy cream and some semi-sweet chocolate. We're going to pour that on top of the cake and gently gently push it over the edge with an offset spatula. I have never used this technique for drips before. This was my very first time. I usually use a bottle or like a little plastic squirt bottle or a spoon, but I wanted kind of a less perfect and more whimsical look for this cake, and I really loved the way that it turned out. It also was like 50 times faster and easier. And then the last step is just to add our cookie dough balls on top of the cake. I decided to make them in kind of a ring, and I broke up a few bits to give it a little bit of texture, and then our cake was all ready to go. I was super excited to cut into this cake and try it, so I cut myself a nice big slice, and let me tell you, this cake does not disappoint. It is definitely a type that will have you coming back for seconds.